I'm Angus Chappell, the co-founder and managing director of Medibis. My role is to steer the company toward our goals and at the same time seek out opportunities that support our values and our growth strategies. At the same time, I've identified some key person risks and continue to build our team that complements a successful cannabis business.
Hi there, I'm Andrew Calvert. I'm a co-founder and the technical director with Medibis. So I've known Angus for about 15 years, both personally and professionally, and he asked me to join with him in assessing the feasibility of a medicinal cannabis operation here in Australia. And my role as the technical director is to look after the compliance and the technical aspects and the efficiency of all aspects of our business, right from our concept design through to the development of a high-tech protected cropping facility here in Queensland.
Particularly with the work that's going into doing research on some of these medical conditions, you'll definitely have much more of an impact than maybe some of the mining positions that you've held before. So just a second question I have here is, when it comes to the problem that you're solving, what is the core problems that you've identified yourselves as a company? And I suppose, what's the opportunity do you feel that you're solving?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alan. And it's interesting that our perception of the problems in the industry now are quite a bit different from what we thought they were when we started. And we've come to realise that actually the core problem is patient access or a lack of patient access pathways. And it used to be the case that the main problem there was a lack of supply. So there was a lack of good quality, efficacious product on the market. But that's no longer the case. There are supply channels there. And one of the key things that we're finding as a problem for patients is just simply a lack of information. So at a high level, you'd be amazed how many people still ask us, and I know you get this a lot, Gus, is it even legal? Can I go to my doctor and get a prescription for medicinal cannabis? There's actually a lot of people out there from a patient perspective that aren't even aware that it's federally legal in Australia. So it's not state and territory specific, it's right across the country, and it has been since 2016. So it's over 5 years now that it's actually been legal, but the availability and the dissemination of patient access information has really lagged in Australia, and that's probably one of the key things that has hampered the uptake and the growth of the industry, but most critically, the ability of doctors to support patients. The other key part of that, barrier to patient access is around the lack of information and efficacy data for prescribers. So this is a medicinal product, so to be able to obtain it, you need to go and get a prescription from a GP or another medical practitioner that can write you a prescription. But a lot of them simply don't have the information. And that's no disrespect to doctors or medical practitioners. It's not really their fault. It's just simply a fact that whilst this is it's an old medicine, it's been around for many thousands of years and been used medicinally for many thousands of years. The stuff that's missing now is the traditional and robust medical science around proving the efficacy, providing the data to doctors to give them the confidence to be able to support their patients by prescribing for particular conditions. And that's one of the key things that we're seeking to change, is to work with doctors and prescribers to support them, to work with our manufacturing partner Bowl in providing that data, which will, and at the end of the day, allow them to better support patients. So that's one of the things that we've realised early on, is we need to provide that information and support the doctors to then in turn help support the patients. That's one of the key things we're looking at.
Yeah, and I guess to support that, one of the problems is time. So the time that we have spent not researching, and this is why Israel have positioned themselves as one of the leaders of research, because they, during our era of prohibition, where obviously not only were we not allowed to use cannabis recreationally, but we weren't allowed to study it or research it either. So we need to play catch up. So one of the things, I was just reading through some of the questions here, and I'll try to sort of answer them succinctly. The problem is time. So we're playing catch up to build this body of evidence, this evidence-based data, clinical evidence. And there's traditional and established pathways. So what we're talking about is an unconventional and untraditional treatment regime using a brand new medicine for a lot of Western countries. So in order for that to make its way into the mainstream, and this is how we're addressing this problem of patient access and also raising awareness there from Jake, is using the established traditional pathways. So our prescribing faculty are quite traditional in the way that they use medicine. And the reason that they do that is to protect their reputation and to try not to make mistakes when they're prescribing. So some of those mistakes can be quite catastrophic. I think the general public know that there's not a lot of dangerous side effects associated with cannabis. But if you have a look at it from the perspective of a prescriber, they need to really know that it's safe. So we'll go back to that later when we're talking about the difference between medicinal and recreational. How do you prove that it's safe? It is the first step. And then the second step is how do you prove that it's efficacious? So we're using the traditional established pathways that GPs and prescribers and nurses and frontline clinicians use in order to give them the confidence to prescribe. So the principal pathway for that is a clinical trial, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial. These things take about a year, up to 2 years to conduct, and they're very expensive, a couple of $1 million. So the problem is time. It takes that long to establish a valid evidence base of clinical data for one formulation. So we know that there's loads of formulations and there's loads of indications that medicinal cannabis is showing promise for, but each of those ones needs to go through this process really for a prescriber to be able to say, okay, is it safe? Is it efficacious? And where's the prescribing metrics for me? How do I know which formulation to prepare for each patient? How do I know how to dose this? And how do I know how to monitor the results and make changes along the way to ensure that the patient is getting the outcomes that they want? One of the problems that we've found along the way, and this is something that Evan has helped us with as well, with the understanding of the science, is that when we talk about cannabis as a medicine, it sounds like it's just one thing. Oh, here's some cannabis, apply that to your problem and you'll be okay. But we know that cannabis is hundreds of things. It's cannabinoids, actually. So really, when we're talking about medicine, we should be talking about cannabinoid therapy. So when we talk about cannabinoid therapy, there's so many combinations and formulations that you can prepare from that one plant. We also know that human physiology isn't uniform. So one patient might present with an indication today that a formulation is shown to be efficacious for, and another patient might present tomorrow with the same indication that needs a slightly different formulation. So these complexities add to the problem of time. So we really need to go through all of the underpinning science to be able to work our way through to those multitude of efficacious patient outcomes that everybody's looking for.
Excellent. I think this as you've started, I suppose, in what my next question around is the stages, because I'm sure that you guys have laid out kind of plans in terms of how you're going to develop the business and commercialize, I suppose, your products as well. Maybe talk us through that initial phase, because this is something that you do mention in your pitch video on virtual as well. Do you want to talk us through what that first stage or the first phase looks like, and particularly around the products? And I'm guessing maybe AL is here for that reason as well, in terms of that first phase. So.
Yeah, sure. You want me to answer that, Gus?
Sure.
Yeah. So the first phase of our business, it's all about putting patients at the front of what we do. And that's one of the reasons why we've decided, well, what we'd like to do right now is to be able to bring top quality products to the Australian market to support Australian patient. And that's why, Bold Pharma is here working with us to facilitate making that happen. So that's really the first phase of our business. But apart from giving us the ability to start off on a positive note by bringing something to patients, it allows us to do a few key things from a business development perspective as well. So first and foremost, it allows us to establish our brand by getting the product out there. Obviously, it allows us to bring in early revenue, which then helps fund subsequent phases of the business development. And when we couple that with the other prerequisite steps that we need to move on to that next stage, which are all about honing and building our logistics channels, getting the quality control and regulatory stuff all right, and like I say, establishing the brand and looking after our patients. So once we've got that in place, and also about validating the size of the market and all those key metrics. And what that allows us to do is to tick off all those key de-risking steps that we need to then rapidly move forward into the next phase of our business, which is just as exciting, which is allowing us to develop our own facility here in Toowoomba. So we tick off all those prerequisite steps. Those are all the things that a major investor is going to expect to see us having done, which will then set us up in the next 12 to 18 months to move forward into developing our own facility, and then move quite rapidly to then doing all those things in-house. So building a complete vertically integrated medicinal cannabis business where we're both cultivating, we're manufacturing, we're actually producing end-user format formulations, which are going to be sent out to patients both here in Australia, and then the next phase of that is to build a thriving export market as well. So it's really all those things in succession which allow us to get to that end game of having our own facility, but it's also about doing it in a sensible, controlled fashion, rather than just going, well, let's just leap straight into doing quite a significant capital spend to build a facility. And let's be real, it is a very capital intensive exercise to do something of the scale and complexity that we intend to do. But to put all those things in place in a sensible and controlled fashion to set us up to get to that point as quickly as we can.
Okay, excellent. And what's the kind of timelines just on the products that will be available for prescribed or approved prescribers?
So we're expecting the products to be here by September. We've been working with BOL for over 6 months, going through that process, setting up the pathways, import and distribution channels, and regulatory compliance. BOL are doing specific customer formulations for us to make sure that they're compliant with the Australian market. So that starts in September, and then that's probably 12 months. So we've already having actually invigorated discussions with investors around the facility, and it's part of the reason why we're bringing products in early as well. Because they are due diligence components for the rigor of to satisfy investor requirements for the facility. So the plans are actually quite well established for the facility. So we're thinking in about 12 months' time, we'll be looking to get that started. It's a 6-month build. It's a 6-month ramp up to full production, which is 2 tons to start with, and then 4 tons. 4 tons, yeah. 2 tons per glass house. And then we can just follow the market from there, follow the demand. And this is the global demand as well. So we've got export channels already established for our facility once it's up and running. And so again, to answer one of the questions there from Shane, within 5 years, we expect to be fully integrated. So producing, manufacturing and researching in-house and in conjunction with research partners from universities and private research organisations. So in year 5, we're expecting to be somewhere up around probably the 5 or 6 tonne per annum point, but it depends on the demand. So the market is expecting that raw flower demand to continue increasing. So in conjunction with some of our other partners, we're looking at contract grow arrangements already and being able to share capacity across multiple facilities to make sure that we can quickly meet demand. And then once the demand is really well established, then you can say, okay, let's commit to to a facility of a certain size.
Yeah, excellent. I think my next question covers off maybe a few people's questions, particularly I think Vanessa, you've asked how Medibis differentiates itself from the competition. Like there's quite a, I think somebody mentioned there's quite a few players in the market at the moment. Like, would you be able to talk to how you guys differentiate yourselves and how your approach is different?
Yeah, it is. I suppose what people are starting to call a crowded space, but it's also we're still at the very early stage of what's looking to be a very large industry. So I suppose it's similar to the philosophy of commissioning in a mining scenario, which is what I've spent most of my life doing. So in order to bring a processing facility online, you need to start from the back and work your way to the front. So you can't be trying to shove things in the front if there's no pathway for it to go through to the end. So you're talking about a raw material in the front and a refined product down the end. So a lot of the early movers have started with this front part. We're gonna set ourselves up to produce cannabis, and again, cannabis as a single thing. So we're essentially reverse engineering the business to meet that that kind of model. So who's at the end? That's where the patients are. Sorry, I'm kind of blocking you off. So this is the end. The outcome is the patient. So what precedes that, and then what precedes that, and what precedes that. So that's how we're working it. So the big problem is the patients can't access the medicine. The problem that precedes that is the prescribers don't know how to prescribe. So that's why we're starting there. And we think that that's a pretty big differentiator. So particularly when you're talking about secondary research. So I mentioned before about using conventional pathways. So one of the conventional pathways that we're using is secondary research. So secondary research takes all of the clinical trials around medicinal cannabis that are currently available globally and synthesizing that information down to what's the common thread and what's the undeniable evidence from each of those trials. So you take all of that evidence, then you do a peer review and say, are we happy that this evidence that we've taken from this source is robust and reliable? And it's weighted then. Is it produced by the University of Sydney? Is it produced by, TAFE Queensland? Where is it produced? What's the weighting? And how significant is that data? So once you've created that body of data, you then go and say, okay, now from there we can prepare the best practice prescribing guidelines for prescribers. And then you make that educational content for doctors, prescribers, nurses, frontline clinicians. Say, according to what we currently know, this is the best practice for prescribing cannabinoid therapy for condition A. This is the best practice guideline for prescribing cannabinoid therapy for condition B. And that information goes through to a GP's chat. GP is there getting all of this information on a daily basis on new medicines. So rather than, they don't have the time to go and do all of this research themselves. So they can be satisfied that once this data arrives to them, that it's been through all of this process, it's validated, it's worldwide, there's no contradictory or better information currently available. And as far as I know, we haven't found anybody else that's doing that.
And I guess just to add to that, I mean, at a high level, I'd like to wrap that up into a nice little thought bubble. what it's about is taking a more analytical and science-based approach to it. So historically, the approach with medicinal cannabis has tended to have been, well, let's just try something, can't do any harm. And a lot of that has been patient-driven. So historically, and especially in relatively new markets such as Australia, we're finding that patients, in a lot of cases, they're doing their own research or reading online and actually going to their physicians, to their GP, better armed with information than the doctors themselves are.
Mm-hmm.
What we're trying to do is actually turn that around by taking a more rigorous scientific approach to the application of what is, as Angus said, not just a single medicine, but a whole range of formulations and different combinations of compounds to treat different conditions. So taking that approach, that traditional medicine approach, applying it to cannabis and giving it a much more science-based approach to how it's used and how we support doctors to support patients.
Maybe Al as well. This is quite important actually in terms of the stage of where Medibis is. But in terms of international experience, and where Australia is in the regulations, like the approach that Medibis is taking at the moment with the data and the science, like, would you be able to talk to that with your experience?
I think that the world itself is in processes of evolution within the industry. Australia plays and has played for many years a significant role in accreditation, in quality control, even in mutual recognition agreements within the Western, the European markets, North American, Israel, and Australia have a very dynamic relationship on exchanging scientific, innovative, and other sources that enable the progress to lead the way in many cases. We are very confident in the Australian market because we believe that its growth and process, whether to patients or whether in the dynamics of the market, and I've seen the questions circling around, does not saturate the market. On the contrary, Israel was considered to be saturated when it had 30,000 patients. Then it was completely shut when it had 50,000 patients and somebody said it cannot grow beyond. Then it went to 70 and 80, and we are at 100,000 patients and the demand keeps on growing. If you look at the market itself, although Israel is strictly limited to medical cannabis, we are confident that recreational or adult use would become part of the total legalization and would become available probably during the first half of 2022. When you look at the recreational market in Israel, the illicit market, you're looking at the market, depends who you're asking, but it's nowhere less than 1 million users, and it's anywhere between that number to 2 million users. So if you look at it from a commercial perspective, even from taxation that the government is missing out on, it's a big number that the market and the government can collect taxes on. And there's a lot of medical users that are still not using it for various limitations and for various reasons. But it's a growing, I don't even want to say the word trend because it's not a trend. It's an alternative, a much less dangerous alternative amongst opioids, and Australia leads the way on that, and many other aspects that enable the ease of patients on a very short period of time with very, very minimal casualties along the way. So the prospects are continuously growing. We've got about 250 million legal users around the world today of cannabis. And we see this thing only going forward. There's no way of stopping it or taking it backwards.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, maybe I'll not go into my next question because I think it's time to maybe go across to quite a few of the questions that we have coming through. So Angus, Andrew, I think all four of you guys actually can see these questions. Do you want to run through some of these quickly yourselves? So like Thomas here, I think Thomas, your question is maybe around maybe the future in terms of where, I suppose, cannabis and use of cannabis maybe more in the recreational space is. But do you see this as like the use of medicinal cannabis forging a way to allow people to grow their own in the future? And I suppose that's a potential threat, I suppose, to the business as well. But do you see this as a pathway?
Yeah, I don't see it as a threat, Alan, actually. I think it's great if people want to grow their own cannabis and try their own medicinal formulations. But I think like we've tried to explain, it's very complicated. You know, it's very, very complicated actually to get a consistent formulation. I mean, you might be able to take cannabis as a whole plant. So this is currently where we're at, and have some results. But really, I think it comes down to how serious is your problem. So if you've got a serious health problem, are you really going to put yourself in a position of being a physician and a scientist and an analyst now to be able to diagnose and treat your own serious condition? So I think that's what it comes down to. How serious is your problem? And that's going to dictate the course of action that you take.
Yeah. So I suppose I liken it to maybe home brewing, right? By growing your own, yeah. So
well, kind of, but again, you're really just brewing to get a little bit intoxicated.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we'll skip that part then.
Well, I mean, so that's sort of where it sits. But certainly, I think Tom also had a question there around recreation, and Eyal mentioned it as well. We support recreational use. We think that it should be legislated the same as alcohol. People should be allowed to, enjoy cannabis recreationally. Sure. The difference with growing your own and having very well developed strains and chemovars and very specific products on the market is where the medicinal companies like us become at the front of that. And we can see what's happening in the States. And I think there's a question there as well down the bottom around, watching what's happening overseas and what they're doing. So we saw Canada in 2018 go recreational following medicinal legislation in 2016 to great success. Big shortages around the country, and a lot of the recreational users were flocking to the medicinal product because it is the best on the market. It's certainly the cleanest. It's grown under very specific conditions to ensure that there's no aflatoxins and foreign matter. No mold has ever been present. And certainly the strains have been bred to be very, strong and healthy and powerful strains. And particularly if you're talking about THC quantity and strength. So similarly in Canada, we think that Australia will follow in the coming years, maybe not 2022. I'm not sure. We're a little bit less progressive than Europe, and we like to watch what everyone's doing there and critique and follow along and try not to make any mistakes. Australia is quite a conservative nation like that, but we're certainly watching what's going on in Canada and America and following that pattern. And like you say, there's revenue, there's incentive there for the government to support recreational use. And certainly, we're going to have some very prolific strains available for that market when it comes online.
With that,
could I just leap in there for a second?
Sorry, Andrew. Yeah.
Sort of segue in there to Vanessa Meyer, like your question around protocols to ensure quality control, make sure they comply with medicinal and regulatory standards. And there's a really strong link there between that question and what Gus was just saying. And short answer to that is, yeah, absolutely. There's very stringent controls around what can be sold as a medicinal product. So there's the TGA, which is the Therapeutic Goods Administration, who are responsible for the administration of all therapeutic goods that are sold in Australia. So there's absolutely guidelines that we have to comply with around that. And we've been working through that process with Bold Pharma around their products to make sure that the analytics that are provided demonstrate compliance with the standards. So obviously that's a given, that's a bare minimum. But it also ties back into this whole discussion around what's the difference, or what differentiates a medicinal product from a recreational product. And the answer to that question is in large part the same as Vanessa's question. It's all about proving that it's safe to use, about understanding what's in it, and about producing analytical data to show you what's in it. So as Angus said, you're making sure there's no molds, no aflatoxins, no heavy metals, no pesticide residues, all those sorts of things. Now, it may sound like a bit of scaremongering to suggest that recreational or street cannabis, for want of a better term, has all those things in it. Absolutely, it doesn't always have all those things. But the point is, you don't know, because when you go and buy a bag of buds from someone down the street, it doesn't come with an analytical certificate. It doesn't come with the certificate of analysis and printed on the box saying exactly what's in it. And more importantly, from a medical application, you don't actually know that you're getting the same thing every time. So it may be completely free of any nasties, any molds, any aflatoxins, any pesticide residues, may be free of those things. But if you're trying to treat a medical condition, which we know from experience can be quite sensitive to the changes in the amount of THC or CBD or the other lower order cannabinoids that you're getting, because a lot of those conditions are quite sensitive to those changes, you don't have control over any of those things when, with recreational street cannabis. It varies every time. And when we supply a medicinal product under a prescription, it absolutely has to have in it exactly what it says on the box to within quite a fine tolerance band. And that's one of the key things that feeds back into giving prescribers and doctors the confidence in writing a prescription for the product. It's knowing that every time that prescription is filled, it's exactly the same, it's repeatable, because that's one of the key components of modern medical practices, repeatability and consistency.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm just mindful of time here. So just a quick mention to the participants and our attendees that are watching. Just know that we will follow up actually with answers to any of the questions that you have provided. So don't stop asking questions here. We will do a follow up, and potentially we do a quick fire Q&A at a later time. But just talking about strategies, and I've got a question here from Jack as well around marketing strategies, about raising awareness for medicinal cannabis and some of the conditions that that's looking to find solutions for through cannabis itself. So I think we can talk to equity crowdfunding as being one use case for this. And I think it may be worth, even at this point, just mentioning nicely the reason why you've decided to go down the equity crowdfunding path. I think we've someone mentioned quite a few listed companies that are doing this, and that's generally what has been happening. Is companies have been listing very early, particularly private and unlisted companies. But do you want to talk to equity crowdfunding and why you decided to equity crowdfund at this point, and maybe some of the marketing around this as well?
Yeah, sure. So I've been reading through the questions as well, and yeah, we'll certainly get to answer all of those. But I think based on your question, there's maybe a little opportunity to bundle some of those answers up. So yes, we're equity crowdfunding. That means that you're getting an equity stake in Medibis. So you do become a shareholder. We do have a cultivation license issued from the ODC already. So the ultimate plan, like we've described, is to build a facility down the track. Your equity is a part of that big picture. You're in for the long, for everything that we do. The crowdfund gives us an opportunity, and we talked about this before, about building something big, but making sure that you're taking small steps. So we've seen, again, from and the flavour of some of the questions there, we've seen other companies make some pretty big mistakes in the past. So one of those we think is taking too big a steps in a burgeoning market. So taking small steps is really important to making sure that each step that we take is robust, it's been validated, and it's future-proof. So equity crowdfunding gives us an ability to take a small step, and that is to bring the products to the market in Australia, to build our brand, to make sure that we're doing all of that right. And, you know, this is simultaneously, I think Andrew would agree, both a strength and a weakness, that we're very focused on doing things right. And sometimes it means, you know, doing it the hard way and doing it the slow way. But that's, we can then look back and go, okay, this is a step that we've built, products to market, integration with educational programs and research, initiating some research activities. So one of the first products that comes over from Israel is a ASD, an autism spectrum disorder formulation. And we've lined up a pathway with a research organisation here, Medicinal Cannabis Research Australia, to do a proof of concept for that in Australia. So this crowdfund will allow us to take those small steps, but we believe, very important steps to then build upon that step by step. So that's essentially one of the reasons why we chose to do an equity crowdfund. The other thing that we found is that there's a very invigorated support from patients and from the general public. So we wanted to give them an opportunity to get on board and be a part of the whole journey. So everybody that comes in during the crowdfund as a shareholder, we will be educating what we're doing, what we're finding, compelling research that we found, you know, how the market is moving, where you can access medicines. One of our partners is CDA, Cannabis Doctors Australia. So if you're a patient wondering how to get access to medicinal cannabis, we refer those patients to CDA. They can do an online consultation with specialist cannabis prescribers and get access to a huge range of formulations, including ours when they become available. So you sort of, through equity crowdfunding, these guys are all in. We treat them as part of our family, and you're on the journey with us. And the journey really, I think maybe you're going to get to this later, Alan, I might be jumping ahead, but we're calling it a revolution because it's a change, it's a shift in thinking about how we deal with health problems, how we treat health problems. And look, there's probably a whole discussion there around how it's so different, but essentially single target, single compound theory is out the door with cannabis. We're talking about whole plant, whole compound combinations that start dealing with the side effects of your problem as well as dealing with your problem, rather than conventional medicine viewing it in terms of, here's your problem, we're gonna prescribe a single compound for that target, and the side effects are added on top of that. So now we're gonna give you something else to deal with that side effect, and then that produces, oh, now you can't sleep, so we're going to give you sleeping pills. Cannabis works in the other way, and what Evan was saying about the ECS, or the homeostasis regulatory system, as soon as you introduce cannabis as a medicine, your body is trying to regulate everything from the ground up toward resolving whatever your specific indication is. And in some cases, like people have seen, I'm sure, you know, we're talking about potentially killing cancer cells by inhibiting the cancer cell's ability to reproduce. So chemotherapy is our conventional pathway, but it's very aggressive and very hard on the body as well. So there's a lot of work to do there. I'm not saying that there's a cancer cure by any stretch, but alongside chemotherapy, when cannabinoids are used, and I know that I'm off the track now a little bit, the sleep is improved, the appetite is improved. So the way that it works as a medicine, we think, requires a little bit of a shift in thinking, and that's also supported by the reluctance in prescribing that we've seen, because it's a different approach to dealing with a problem than we've previously seen.
Excellent.
Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's fair to say, I think the general theme from this session, I think you've got a clear, I think you provided a very clear approach, particularly at the early stage. And I feel like you guys have spent a lot of time and effort into working out, particularly the problem that you're solving for patients. And I think that's pretty critical at a time whenever, okay, the regulations are restrictive in Australia, but there is huge changes coming. And I think that's, I feel that's how I feel the pitch for investment from talking to you over the last few weeks has come across, and it's refreshing to hear it as well. I think from a business perspective as well. So you guys no doubt are some of the experts in this space and in the country right now. So and it's really I think one key aspect that I think is interesting is it's coming from from the location from Queensland, the reason why you're located there. All of these things are pretty compelling from an investment perspective. So, as I mentioned, we will do a follow-up. We have a recording for pretty much 80% of this. I may have started a bit late, but we have a recording of all of the questions and answers that was provided, and we will do a follow-up with either written questions or maybe even a short video for any of the questions that we didn't get across. But in closing, thank you very much to each of the panelists for spending the time educating us and giving us a bit more insight into the investment opportunity in Medibis. And also thank you to the audience, actually, for checking in. And I can see here 50 very engaged participants in the webinar today. So in closing, the Medibis expressions of interest on virtual are closing at the end of Monday. So this is your last opportunity to express interest in the offer and get early access to the investment offer when it does go live. We do hope to have the draft offer document available before the offer goes live. So make sure that you have been registered for that, and we will follow up with any information and insight before it does launch. So thank you again. Thanks, panelists. And yeah, sending out any last comments from any of you guys?
Yep. Thanks, Alan. It's been great chatting with you. I'm just actually a bit overwhelmed by the volume of questions we've got there. We'd love to get through a few more of those, but we will respond to each of those in turn. It's been a discussion. And yeah, it's closing for me. We're super excited to be doing this, and would love to have you all be part of it as well.
We very much thank you for your support and your interest in Medibis.
Fantastic. Thanks, Al. Thanks, Evan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for joining our webinar. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to answer all of the questions. So that's what we're here to do today. So we had a couple of questions that were all sort of along the same theme. So what we're going to do is respond to all of those questions, read out everybody's questions, and then respond to them at the same time.
Yeah, so we had first off a question from Matthew, who asked us, this market is getting crowded. What makes Medibis different from other medicinal cannabis companies? Then Oliver asked us, as a patient, as well as previously been involved in research in the space, I've seen a few issues with everything from product to information and messaging, etc. How would you say you are most different from your competitors? Are you doing clinical trials?
Shane has asked, what sets your company apart from other emerging companies and startups in the market? And where do you see yourselves in the market in 5 years?
And Scott then asked us, it's great that we can help people with the benefits of CBD, but from an investor point of view, how is Medibis going to compete with imports of lower construction ongoing costs from offshore competition?
Oliver is asking, did you say before that a clinical trial will be something that you're looking into and conducting? And if you were conducting a clinical trial, what kind of condition would the focus of that be?
And finally, Tom asked us, said the points that Dr. Evan raised in regard to study that will be conducted, how big of an opportunity is this for the company, for shareholders, and of course, patients here in Australia?
So to answer all of those questions, we will be the first company in Australia, as far as we believe, with a full complement of Israeli cannabinoid-based products. And the reason this is exciting is because Israel is where cannabis was first treated as a medicine in line with modern science and modern scientific techniques. So they discovered the endocannabinoid system, or the ECS, endogenous cannabinoid system, and they also were the first ones to elucidate THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, and CBD cannabidiol. And since then, they've been developing the medicine around, the science, around cannabis as a medicine.
So next question, what is the predicted growth of sales locally versus internationally over the initial growth phase?
Yeah, so currently the Australian market is growing quite rapidly. Last year in 2020, we saw around 91,000 prescriptions for medicinal cannabis, and that number in a year is now up to 150. So it's growing quite fast. So in the first stage, our business development strategy is to supply the Australian market with these new products from Israel. Once we have our facility online, then we'll be able to open up to the export market. So not only Europe, but any of the international countries where medicinal cannabis is federally legislated. So these international markets are an order of magnitude larger than the Australian market, but they are also growing as well. So both markets, I suppose Australia as part of the global market, is all growing quite rapidly.
Excellent. So following on from that, we had a few questions related to production and processing. So one anonymous attendee asked us, just wondering about the farming methods and the carbon footprint in relation to cannabis production.
Vanessa's asking, what controls and protocols has Medibis developed to ensure quality control over your products and to ensure that they comply with the medical and regulatory standards required? And Shane is also asking, are you conducting any clinical studies, and do you have plans to apply for registration for any products with the TGA? So GACP, Good Agricultural Collection Practices, and GMP, Good Manufacturing Practices, provide the framework for the quality of production and for manufacturing. So GACP for production, GMP for manufacturing. The TGA defines the medical standards. So the question from Vanessa was medical and regulatory standards. So this is TGO 91 for raw flour and TGO 93 for formulations for oils. So all of our products will comply with these, and all medicinal cannabis products on the Australian market must comply with these orders, and TGA do regular audits to make sure that you're complying with these things. So that's how we ensure that our regulatory compliance systems and pharmacovigilance are in place and satisfy those requirements. So these types of things, this is the framework that underpins a medicinal cannabis product and separates it from a black market medicinal cannabis product, because we can't sell products without complying to these regulations.
Based on our commitment to high and repeatable quality products, the farming and processing methods that we use incorporate controlled environment agriculture, or CEA. So these are high-tech glasshouse systems. Now, indoor is far too cost prohibitive, and outdoor, on the other hand, is far too much variability around what we get. So we've chosen a sensible middle ground here to get repeatable, consistent quality whilst keeping the cost under control.
So this is things like supplemental lighting and blackout curtains to manipulate the season and maintain consistent year-round production. Integrated energy solutions for cost-effective supplemental CO2 or CO2 enrichment to maximize productivity and quality for the plants, and also reducing the carbon footprint.
Yeah, so from a plant fertigation perspective, we're also talking about high-tech hydroponic cultivation infrastructure, and these systems are highly automated to make sure we get consistency of dosing and maximising the productivity and health of the plants. We've also got advanced water treatment and water recycling technologies, so we're making sure that the water going in meets the required purity standards, and we're recirculating and using as much of that water as efficiently as possible.
We've also got advanced proprietary nutritional regimes and fertigation regimes, along with integrated pest management, predatory mites, and microbiome technology or probiotics to mitigate the need for pesticides in our facility.
And of course, from a quality assurance and quality controls perspective, we have stringent protocols in place, and that involves the testing and sampling at multiple stages throughout the production and the drying and the refining processes. And naturally, we're including independent third-party analytics there, and that makes sure that all batches of products that leave the Medibis facility are in full compliance with the highest pharmaceutical standards.
So there's a question around research strategy from Anonymous. Who are Medibis's research partners to ensure best clinical outcome for patients, and whose research will be considered reliable and credible?
So regarding research strategy, we had a question from an anonymous viewer. The question is, who are Medibis's research partners to ensure best clinical outcomes for patients, whose research will be considered reliable and credible?
Yeah, so Medibis has a research partnership with the University of Queensland, and in line with distinct stages within our business development strategy, we're planning to formalise further research partnerships with an established network of contacts in leading research groups, both in Australia and internationally. So this is other universities, University of New South Wales, independent contract research organisations. Our partners in Germany have established research pathways, and so do our partners in Israel. So one of the things that we ensure for the robustness and the reliability of this data is that we use a credible research organisation.
Awesome. Okay.
Another anonymous question. Are any journal articles available for those who want to look into the scientific side of the products being proposed by Medibis?
Yeah, so there are now approximately 50,000 peer-reviewed studies on cannabis and cannabinoids, including clinical trials. We consider that only about 20% of these studies are both relevant and robust enough to be considered valuable to industry development and for the support of public health. As Medibis products become available, we'll be sharing some of our scientific library to provide a trusted source of information for doctors and patients. So we now had a question about the medicinal cannabis industry in Australia from another anonymous viewer. So the question is, why aren't any Australian MC companies profitable? How will you compete with low-cost Asian MC producers?
Yeah, so for startup companies, sometimes investors want to see growth of market share in priority of early profitability. So clearly both are important, but it's important to note that the industry in Australia is still young, and a number of these companies that are making profit are reinvesting back into business growth. So that's why sometimes you don't see reported profits where there is still significant revenue. With regard to the low cost, Medibis is a premium brand with a focus on quality, efficacy, and safety. And this is in order to maintain the trust in the Medibis brand, which is very important to us. Medibis products will be cost competitive with other high quality locally produced products and imported products. Australia has a globally recognized reputation for producing high quality products, both food and medicine. So this is something that differentiates us from low cost Asian producers, and certainly it puts Australia in a really good position to be globally competitive on the back of that reputation. And this has built around some of the other metrics that we've talked about earlier, and we'll talk about a little bit further on, around stringent quality control and strict compliance and regulatory framework.
All right, so regarding the medicinal cannabis industry in general, we had another anonymous question. What is the future of the Australian cannabis industry? When will the industry take off? And a comment that the current regulations aren't workable for companies and they're expensive for patients.
Yeah, so from a patient perspective, Australian regulations are indeed strict for quality of product and for security standards and licensing compliance. So to date, since the licensing system was installed, there haven't been any significant breaches of those conditions of those licenses that we know. And the government has understandably commenced this from a cautious standpoint, and this was based on some of the track records from other countries that had some non-compliance issues when they launched medicinal cannabis legislation. And this is not a bad thing, especially from a product quality perspective. We hope that the standards aren't relaxed, and we believe in the higher standards for efficacy and safety of cannabinoid medicines for Australian patients.
Yeah, very good points, Gus. So from a business perspective, of course, there's always a risk for early entrants and early adopters, but we're all over that. So from a business analysis point of view, we've evaluated all these critical factors across numerous scenarios, and we've come up with risk mitigation strategies, as part of our business development plan. So we believe that Medibis has developed all these strategies along an appropriate and sensible timeline, which is in line with our desire to grow rapidly, but also do it in a sensible and controlled fashion. So Medibis has also avoided that whole initial boom-bust cycle that you've seen in other parts of the market, which was both predicted and inevitable. So now the industry's moving out of that sort of frantic early growth and speculative phase into a moderate and steady growth phase. So we think that the timing for our business development is spot on, and we've avoided this really volatile and high risk period in the industry's development. With cash burn rates were high and a lot of companies lost some money. So we think we're entering into it at the right time.
Yeah, and we feel like it is right now, and specifically for Australia, we think that we're well placed with our agricultural standards and our agricultural heritage, and particularly when we're talking about exports, the growing conditions, and like we've already touched on, our quality standards. So these factors place Australia very well in the industry, and we're now positioning ourselves. We're starting to see a lot of export deals come online into Europe. Europe's a very hard market to export into with medicinal cannabis due to the strict quality standards that they have as well. And our standards are in line with those. So it places Australia in a really competitive position globally.
Yeah, so we had a bunch of questions, some general things around the crowd fund, the parameters, the amount we're seeking to raise. So a bunch of questions. Gus, what were they?
Yeah, so Carl's asking, what's the target capital raise for the equity crowdfunding? And Anonymous is asking how much you're raising in this capital round.
Then we had a question from Vanessa. Are we allowed to ask how much you're hoping to raise through equity crowdfunding? Apologise, this has been mentioned on the virtual platform. And Brett asked us, not sure if this was answered earlier, but does this potential investment guarantee any stakeholder equity?
Scott is also asking, do you have any framework around the equity stakes, min, max, and exit opportunities or buyouts? And Shane's also asking, what are the stages and key financial targets for the crowd fund?
All right, so just addressing some general parameters around the crowd fund. So the current range of which we're seeking to raise is between 1 million and 2 million for this round of capital raising. And yes, this is an equity stake in Medibis Holdings, so it's ordinary shares, the same as Angus and I and other founding shareholders have, with the same rights and privileges. So this means that you're part of our overall vision for the whole Medibis group, which is to bring products to the market, to initiate research activities that open access pathways for medicinal cannabis patients, and to get our products established on the market. So next year, we're planning to commence construction of our production facility in Queensland, and that's something for which we're already licensed. We have our cultivation license issued, and following that, we have plans within the 3 years or so to take the company public.
Yeah, so once the expression of interest is complete, we'll be finalising all of those details, the min-max and the equity offer. And as a Medibis shareholder, we'll keep you regularly updated with our progress, what's happening in the Australian market, any regulatory updates, and particularly around patient access. We'll be trying to assist you with patient access queries, as well as keeping you up to date with what's happening in the market globally, both from a research perspective, patient outcomes, all of that kind of stuff. So thank you very much for listening to the end. We hope that we answered your questions, and we look forward to seeing you soon.